Hi everyone, welcome to another night of Translating Life. Special shout out to Gillian and Jack. I can see you. I can't actually see you. You can see me.
And Rainey.
Rainey? Rita?
And Rita.
And Petra's not, she's here. Maybe Harry's there.
Woo-woo!
There's proof. It's good. Now, last week we were expanding on what we understand discipleship to be and its significance. And to dovetail that in with what we're doing this week, I thought I would read that quote that Kelly read out one more time. A gifted discipler, by the way, discipleship never happens by accident. It is an intentional pursuit. And a gifted discipler is someone who invites people into a covenantal relationship with him or her, but challenges that person to live into his or her true identity in very direct and graceful ways. Without both dynamics working together, you will not see people grow into the people that God created them to be. So you've got this very graceful, gentle, loving way someone's working with a person, but it's still very direct, and there is challenge and there is love. And as we've journeyed along in discipleship, you can usually see, if somebody comes to the Lord just brand new, that haven't had a church background, you can normally pick their growth and their development and how it follows a progression. And you can tell where people get stuck in that progression. And if they get stuck at these key points, there's usually no or very slow growth from that point on. And that's not the will of God. That's not what God intended. As the Bible says, that the path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter until the full light of day. So God intends a person to grow and grow and grow and grow into godliness. Now, life certainly has different seasons, I understand that. But when people's growth slows, it's usually not God, it's them. And they've normally hit one of these key barriers, where there's a line to cross or a barrier to push through. To name just two significant ones, or a few significant ones, would be identity. You've probably observed people that have fractured identities in churches. Put your hand up if you've noticed. Okay. Did you notice the no or slow growth? Yes, and if you've observed them over 5 years, you pretty well guarantee that in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, there will still be no or slow growth. And if you've lived long enough, you would have seen that. Another one of those sorts of barriers is where the person is continually turning in on themselves. That is a sentence to stop growing right at that point. And until that lifestyle is reversed, there will be no more growth. And we're talking like for decades and decades and decades. And then the Lord's purpose purely becomes to shift the person from that. Okay? But any person where God is having to wrestle with them, where they're wanting to return to self-focus and self-absorption, and he's trying to turn them away and turn their eyes outward towards himself and his purposes, and then they turn back and back forth. The Bible has a word for that. A double-minded person is unstable in all their ways. Now, emphasize the word all. Ways, meaning the way they go, how they walk, the choices they make, the lifestyle they live. But actually, a right interpretation of the Greek word for minded is a double-souled person, where they're allowing two strong things to fluctuate inside their heart. They're caught between two things that they want. They never decide something. So when we see that, growth stops at that point. So if a person's in discipleship, then helping a person navigate through that is very, very critical. And you need a lot of wisdom, because at that point, you can do it really wrong. For instance, churches try and get their congregations focused on the lost. Do they or not?
Yeah.
But how do they do that, and what motives do they employ, and what motives do they create with the methods that often are employed?
Guilt.
Guilt? Guilt's a good one. Okay, what's another one? What methods are used? Guilt's a strong one. Basically make it fun, make it enjoyable, get the flesh involved. And that's methods. When it comes to motives, though, you normally find guilt is a strong one. Performing to gain acceptance is another one, huge as well. And people will do that all by themselves. No church makes them. It's an internal driver. Performance to gain acceptance from either God or man. And whenever a person hasn't dealt with their identity, there's no way that one's not in play. Okay? Another one is a sense of legalism. So it's not only guilt, there's massive consequences and expectations attached to it. And so again, it creates a drivenness within the person. Now, it might think, well, it doesn't matter, people are getting saved. Well, it does matter. The measure of any ministry is the measure of Christ within that ministry. And the purity of heart that a person operates in why they do what they do, governs whether it's acceptable to God or not. Jesus, or the Father, will only recognise what's of his Son within your soul. He will only reward what comes from the life of his Son inside your soul. Everything else is wood, hay and stubble, and it usually produces wood, hay and stubble in other people. You just got to live long enough to notice that one. Okay? So there's just where we go. But nevertheless, if a person is turned in on themselves, they will stop growing. So when a person crosses that line and says, Lord, now your purposes are my purposes. Your will, my will. What you want is what I want. And when they cross that line and begin to walk in that lifestyle, tremendous growth comes. So, and you can tell when a person comes to that place. Often when they're new Christians, the Lord doesn't start there straight away, often because it's flourishing in their soul and they're doing it naturally, you know what I mean? But there will come a crunch time, a dark night of the soul, when the Lord will really take on their will. And that choice to give over at that point, and you know when it comes because it's like big, you know what I mean? And that normally is the line that you cross. And when you cross the line by choosing his will at that point, it's usually irreversible and the person normally goes on beautifully to grow and bear fruit. So I'm going to read you a quote by T. Austin Sparks. He made the observation it's universal. It's one of those things that are what we call self-evident. And all I'm going to do is find it. Yeah. It would be in lesson 14, wouldn't it? It would be. Yeah. Our own enlargement, our own growth, is bound up with our vocation. In other words, our life purpose, what we do outwardly in the world. We shall not make much progress spiritually until we take spiritual responsibility. Anyone seen a 30 or a 35-year-old gamer guy? What does he struggle to do?
Life's purpose.
Take responsibility. What doesn't he do? He doesn't grow, yes? Why doesn't he grow? Because he's not taking responsibility for his own life. But even if he does take care of his responsibility for his own life and he invests his money, he does his stuff and he's looking after himself well, does he still grow? Not much, eh? Men don't grow until they take responsibility for other people. So spiritually, as a son of... How many... Ladies, are you a son of God?
Yep.
According to the Bible, you are. It's a universal term that includes both genders. So when you read the term sons of God, don't feel excluded. Okay? Do you feel excluded when they use the word mankind?
No.
No. Same thing. All right? Just in case you're wondering. I know it sounds weird. You're a son of God. Yeah, it is. I know. You part of mankind? Well, there you go. Same deal. Now, it is vital to our growth that we have concern for souls. I do not believe people do grow, however much information they accumulate along spiritual lines, if they are all the time turned in on themselves. Now, we have seen people go to conference after conference after conference and course after course after course and read book after book after book. You can almost write a song, from conference to conference is changing me. But it doesn't change people that way. They can accumulate as much information as they like, thinking that will save them or change them or heal them. But often their own healing is involved in giving their life away. Do you remember that story of Sadhu Sundar Singh?
Yeah.
Remember that Christian sadhu that went around preaching the gospel, trusting the Lord for everything and just living very, very simply. And he was travelling to Tibet and he was in a blizzard and he would, a person would normally die in those sub-zero temperatures, and he saw a guy on the side of the road who was freezing to death, and he picked him up out of mercy and he carried him with him. And a man who refused to help walked on by him. And as he's journeying along, that man that didn't want to help was now frozen dead on the side of the road. And Sadhu actually, through the exertion and the heat that he had to exert in getting the man to the next town, saved his own life and him. Well, Rosie and I have seen a lot of people not give themselves to the purposes of the Lord, consider themselves, be Christians, and we have walked and we have carried people on our back that were frozen. Some of them were dead. You know what I mean? We carried a dead person and they didn't get, when we reached the town, they were dead. But we weren't. And we've walked past a lot of people that decided to look after themselves as Christians. And over 40 years, we've walked past a lot of now dead, once were Christians. True or false, Bubba?
Yeah.
And the longer you walk, the more you see it. And you see the fundamental reason for it is their life was wrapped up in themselves and never got over themselves. They never stepped into God's purposes. Their will was never surrendered. And it's huge. Now, so your life is either given to His purposes or your own. There's no middle ground. So, now for us, for Rosie and I, this has probably been our life message. We've decided to switch. This is lesson 14. Last week was discipleship. That was lesson 15. We've decided to switch that so that what we're talking about now is our last lesson in Translating Life. The reason it is that's our life message for Roz and I. That's the one thing that we've grafted into our life that our life would say before we needed to say with words. And I guess we wrote the other 14 chapters so that we could clarify what we meant. You know what I mean? In this session. But for Roz and I, we have decided to give ourselves to people that don't know the Lord. So we spent 40 years of early mornings, late nights, persecutions, loneliness, marginalisation. Whoa! But it's actually not woe, because we would do it all again. We're happy we live the way we lived and we don't intend to change. We're going to take as many people to heaven as we can, and that makes sense for us in our lifestyle, and we've not found anything higher to give ourselves to. And the reward of that for us is continual growth. The reward of that is staying close to the Lord. The reward of that is staying in humility. The reward of that is staying in a place where you need the Lord. The reward of that is giving out. He who refreshes others, says the Proverbs, will himself be refreshed. Give, and it shall be given to you. Only God will press it down and shake it together and compress it and let it run over because you have given. We have found that's what it's like. True or false, Bubba? True, isn't it? But we can't turn around and say, listen, you guys need to give yourself to the lost or you're not going to grow. You know what I mean? That's what we don't want to say. We hope you remember the long journey that we've had together on spiritual life and thriving and how life works. You know what I mean? And it produces pure motives. So if you flourish within your own soul, this is where it goes naturally. It doesn't have to be flogged out of you or made, or you don't need to be made feel guilty or tell you the horrors of hell or whatever. You know what I mean? Whatever has to motivate Christians to get off their butts and think of someone else besides themselves. Life will produce an outward love. The fruit of life is love. The only pure motive is love. Love for God. And life will produce a love in your heart that extends itself to all people. I think Martin Luther said it well, you know, like people think of Martin Luther in their head as this sort of earnest, dull, loveless preacher that had right doctrine sort of thing. But how can that sort of person write this? Okay? He says, the love of God, which lives in man, loves sinners, evil persons, fools, and weaklings, in order to make them righteous, good, wise, and strong. Rather than seeking its own good, the love of God flows forth and bestows good. Therefore, sinners aren't attracted because they are loved. Therefore, sinners are attractive because they are loved. They're not loved because they're attractive. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. The love of God bestows upon the object of his love that which is good. The love of man is drawn towards love by what is good. God is different, and the love of God in a person's soul is different. For this reason, the love of man avoids sinners and evil persons. This is the love of the cross, born of the cross, which turns in the direction where it does not find good, which it may enjoy, but where it may confer good upon the bad and the needy person. So, love simply loves. But when it loves a person's highest good. And a person's highest good is Christ. To not have Christ is to leave people crippled and broken. And any person that likes expressing love to crippled and broken people without desiring them to be healed and whole, what does that smack of?
Like hypocrisy.
Yet sentimentality, where it's about the person, not about the recipient. You know, there's an old saying, you know what I mean? There's a man stuck in a pit, and Confucius went by and said, you know what I mean, there is evidence that men should stay away from such places. And, you know, a Muslim went by and said, oh, at last it is the will of Allah. Do you know what I mean? And all the various religious people went by until Jesus went by and he said, give me your hand, brother, and I will pull you out. That's love. I want to be loved not with Disney-style sentimentality, Oprah-style. I would like to be loved by God by what he does in my life. And if I'm going to love people, I want to see the God who changes lives do in their hearts what he did in mine. Now, I trust I strike a chord with each of you that you have the same motive. What he's done in your heart, the gratefulness that you have, it naturally wants that for another person. That's the love of God. So now, this whole issue is dealt with beautifully in one chapter of the Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. At the end of chapter 4, it sets it up, goes through beautifully chapter 5, and at the first verse of chapter 6, just absolutely brings it home. It is just a perfect answer to this issue. So, if I could say that seeing people grow in the area of giving their life away and joining with God's purposes. Remember that Telston Sparks quote we talked about? What was it? For sufficiency in the Christian life, there had to be three things. One, that God was concerned with something great worthy of himself. And then two was that his people see that great thing and actually join with him and cooperate with him in that. And the third one was to realise, well, actually, that's going to cost you a lot. And it's going to be a lot of conflict for you to join into as well. But if somehow that's what you want to do. Now, that's when a person truly starts to grow into godliness and maturity. And until they get there, they're not going to come into godliness. So, but how does that outwork itself? Well, it seems to be The first one is the real new birth that actually does change the heart. Okay? And there is a reversal of the rule and principle of the heart from a supreme preference towards oneself to a supreme preference towards God, pleasing Him and loving Him. That is supernatural, it's heavenly in its origin, and it does the flip in your heart. Straight away, immediately. Not slow, immediate. 2, that new birth then produces a love in the heart, the love of God. The third one is actually the realization of eternity and the value of life in comparison to eternity. And then having realized that, then there is what we call a realization. It sort of goes like this. Oh boy. The sort of realization you have when you see someone that you love that is distracted, heading straight for a cliff, and unless you yell out, they're going over. Oh no. And the fifth one is a simple choice. And the sixth one then becomes a walk. And 2 Corinthians chapter 5 really covers that quite beautifully, actually. We've had time. I'd love to read the whole chapter and then break it down. I don't know how we go with time. But so that you can see that this is just not my idea. It's beautifully laid out by God. So let's just pull apart the real new birth and what it does in a heart and why it sets it up with a pure motive of love to move into, and when you understand that life is about preparation for eternity and you see things now from an eternal point of view, it changes with a motive, with that, a new life, and love in your heart, realizing that, and all of a sudden a choice is made and you step across the line and now you're living a totally different lifestyle. That's sort of how it unpacks itself. So I thought I might get Mel up now to unpack this when it comes to understanding the new birth and the motives it creates in the heart and how it produces this and how it goes on that way.
Yeah,
Mel?
so good. Okay, cool. Yeah. When I first came to the Lord, there was such a keenness to follow Him. I just want to follow you, Jesus. Whatever you say, that's it. Super simple. I'm not so keen on conferences anymore. I'm not going to touch another book that is a self-help book. Like, I just want Jesus Himself. I want to really know you. Really, really, really know you. So I started to walk with Him. And there was such a natural desire to see people know Jesus. Before, Jesus wasn't a reality. So if I saw another person that wasn't a follower of Jesus, well, I'm not a follower either. Like, we're fine. There's no discomfort. There's no tension. I felt quite comfortable with that before. But when the Lord started working in my heart after I repented and came to Him, I saw people in such a different way. So I would look at people and think, oh man, wow, here you are, a lost person in the world, just like me, not too long ago, and you don't know Him. I want you to know Him so much. And the love in my heart was such a natural care. The way that it worked out was such a care for people, even people who are strangers. But because I just looked at them differently, that, oh man, like I used to be in your world, like I am in your world, but I used to be the same as you, and oh man, there was just this one thing that changed. It's Jesus, and oh, like I really want you to know the Lord. And also, I had, of course, a picture of what it meant to follow the Lord, obey the Lord, because I could see Paul and Rosa's lifestyle. So there wasn't a confusion there wasn't such a confusion of, there's different ways to follow the Lord, Melody. There's this way, there's this way, there's this way, like you choose. There wasn't a confusion in that sense, because for me personally at that time, I didn't really trust other influences. So I just had the one influence. and the Lord was just working through that, which was great. So I was like so keen, and so Paul and Roz would be talking about it, and they'd say, "Oh, look, it's the best thing to see people come to the Lord." And I'm in my heart, I'm like, it would be the best thing. It's just I've never seen it. So there was something really striking in my own heart that I want to see this too. I want to see this too. I love people now. Now I do love people, and I want to see this happen. So I started to just engage with this. Scary, little steps, just started to engage with people. And it was so beautiful because this motivation in my heart was so strong. And this motivation was basically, first of all, the first motivation was gratitude. As we were just saying, such a gratitude that he did this for me. Jesus did this for me. Oh, this lost person, oh man, he wants to do that for you. It can't be that it's just me. He wants to do that for you. I'm blessed and I'm thankful to receive all of this. But man, I want to give out. I want to do this, So there was such a gratitude, an awareness of the reality of heaven, the reality of hell, and the way that Jesus had so thoroughly cleansed me from the evil that would have taken me off the cliff. So such a reality, such a gratitude. So with that gratitude, it didn't feel hard to love these strangers. It didn't feel like an effort. Whereas before, in previous life, I would read, I would read self-help books, and they would say a trick of being successful is to be considerate of others. So if you want to be successful, be considerate. And I thought, oh gosh, that's hard, but I'm going to try that. So it felt like such a difficulty to try to care about this person. So before, there was such an effort and a push, whereas afterwards, it didn't feel hard to love them because I knew I was loved. I knew the Lord had just thoroughly poured out his blood for me. Who does that? To completely take care of all of my guilt and all of my shame and issues and brokenness and everything, Jesus has taken it. I love the Lord. I'm so grateful. So that was the initial, just such a huge motivation from my heart. I love the Lord. I love these people. Wow, that's cool. I didn't have that before. Love these people. And I'm just so grateful to be saved. Wow, to know Jesus. Oh man, I know him and you don't know him. Oh gosh, I'm keen. So that was the initial first motivation coming from the heart that was a new heart, coming from the new heart and the new life. And then as I continued on, the motivation, which originally was always there, but it just grew stronger. There was another motivation that came. So the second motivation, after seeing that, oh man, after seeing the first person come to Jesus, it just keep going. And then there was a point, kind of the second time, similar to what Paul was saying, where the conflict comes up pretty strong, where you're running with Jesus, it's coming so naturally. And then there is a choice, there is another choice of will you continue in this way, even if it does bring some cost to you. Will you continue, Melody? That kind of question. And the way that happened was, I was at university, and a classmate came up to me and said, Melody, can you come at 12 o'clock on Fridays from 12 to 1, and can you share Transcending Life? I'll bring a group together, I've organized the room, everything. And that was and I said to her, her name was Melody as well. Yeah, Melody. So she was a Chinese Melody. And I was,
as opposed
to a Chinese Melody. Wow. Anyway, yes.
That's good.
You're right. Yeah, I didn't want to confuse you because I was about to say, Melody, so that was her name. Melody. Look, unfortunately, gosh, that's my hour lunch break. I've got a lecture tutorial. I've got 1 hour and I've got a tutorial. I'm gonna die if I don't have a break. I'm so sorry. And Melody was like, oh, you know what? It's okay. You gotta have your lunch. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And oh yeah, look, you need to review and you need to kind of consolidate your notes. I understand, like it's packed out. And you come from a Gold Coast and you would be exhausted. Yeah, that's fine. No worries. So Melody kind of left it, and I was like, oh cool. So I left, and I'm on the train going home, super uncomfortable, and I'm realizing, so this is the cost. Like, well, what do I want really? Like a group of girls who would hear the gospel, keen, the venue set up. I've got a sister with me who's keen for this. Like, oh my gosh, when do you get that? Like, oh, like I either have my lunch or I can let them know the Lord. And I started thinking, and I was like, hang on, what is this about? And I started realizing Jesus is worth it. So this motivation just came up in me. Jesus is worth this. Whoa, Jesus is worth it. This is it. I'm going to need to prepare the lesson, because at that time I wasn't so familiar with the truths. So I was like, I'm going to need to prepare this. It's going to take time, and it's going to take time away from review and study. But wow, Jesus is worth it. So I'm thinking, and this thought came to my mind. I had just before that, listened to a CD. It's called 10 Shekels and a Shirt. Amazing message. And in that message, there's a story, and there's a line. And the line is coming from the heart of somebody who's decided, oh yeah, I wanna love you, Lord. And the line is, may the lamb that was killed, slain, receive the reward of his suffering. May Jesus get what he shed his blood for. May he get it. May he get it because he's worthy. So that line just came back to my mind. And I was like, yeah, may he get that. And I was like, oh man, I gotta talk to Melody. So I texted her, Melody, I'm in. Like, let's do this, let's go. I was like, oh gosh, what was I thinking? So I texted her. As soon as I texted that, I was like, yeah, may he get it. May he get what he wants. May he get what he deserves. So said that to Melody, worked it out. Thank God Jesus gave that opportunity. Through that, some of you have met Helen. That was how Helen came to the Lord. Through that was the opportunity. That was motivation coming up in my heart that I reckon was there, but it just needed to come out and grow and be confirmed. Because naturally there's this desire, I want to obey the Lord, I want to follow the Lord. But when there's a conflict, when there's a cost where you're going to be tired, you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be disorganized, it's going to be tough. When there's that conflict, that cost, what are you going to do? Will you continue? In fact, will you step over the line again, kind of thing? And will you shift at the point where it's uncomfortable? So through that, there was just such a deep understanding. He is worth my life. He's worth my life. He's worth it. My life will look different than other people. That's all good. He's worth it. So that was a shift, and that motivation came up. And then as I've continued with the Lord, another motivation, again, which has always been there ever since I had the new birth, but another motivation came up strongly and has been growing and growing and growing ever since that day when I first followed him. The third motivation was and is, I want to truly know him. I want to know him. Why do we share with people who in the end they're like, no calls, no texts, no replies, cut, Melody, you're out, you're done, I'm not interested in Jesus anymore, so I'm not interested in you anymore. Why do we share with people? It's not really for the people, although we love them. It's for the Lord, because he deserves their life. He shed his blood so he would have them. So it's for the Lord. And as for me personally, I want to really know him. I want to know his heart. I don't want, at the end of my life, to see the Lord face to face and realize, oh, I hardly know you. I hardly know your mind. I hardly know what you think, what you want, what is precious to you, what is valuable to you, what's important to you. I hardly know you. You know how when somebody asks you, oh, so, so-and-so is a really nice person, and you're like, oh, yeah, and they ask you, so what's your job? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I've known her for a year, but I don't know her. I actually don't. And so the core motivation, one of the motivation in my heart is I want it to be that I become similar to him. And I become in a way where I can relate to him in a small way, where I've been with him. We've been in this thing together. And I know his mind. I know his heart. I know his motivation. I know what's in his heart when he says, there are other sheep who are not in this fold. I must go to them too. I want to know what's in his heart. So that motivation has always been there from the beginning. But now it's deeper, it's stronger. Ever since I had that life with Jesus, I've had it. When I let it flourish, when I get focused again, that's why we want to follow him in the purpose of his purpose. Because when we just have life with him, but we have our dream and our purpose, we are missing his heart. At the end of the day, it's him or us. And so it's so easy to miss his heart, to miss who he is, to miss being with him in his love for people, in his love. It's so easy to just miss it, and I'm aware of my ability and my very strong possibility of missing it from self-absorption, where I don't know who he is. I don't know him because I'm thinking about me. But I've found that if you're looking for Jesus, you go to a person who he's calling, and you go straight to that person and you start being there with that person, and you're like, oh, Jesus is here. Oh gosh, oh right, because you're calling him. Because, oh man, because you love him and you want to bring him into your kingdom. So he is in that place, and that's how we know him. So those three motivations, we're always there in the beginning, and the first one was, I'm just so grateful to you for what you did. And I just want to love you, and how do I love you? This is what I want to do for you. The second one, you're worth my life. You're bigger, you're more beautiful, you're better, you're worth it. And then the third one, that when I'm with him in this, I know him. That fully is what keeps me going in this path and in this life.
Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to receive what we've done in the body. Therefore, because we know what it is to fear the Lord, in the sense of I love him and I want to please him, we try to persuade men. And the love of Christ compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again. So because of that, we don't regard people the way we used to, whether they're good for us or bad for us. Because if anybody was in Christ, they'd be a new creation, and old things would pass away, and everything would become new. So that's how it works in a human heart as they step across the line and join him in his purposes. It comes from life. It comes from a motive of love. It does have gratitude, and it does have love for him, and it does want to please him, and it does want to join him in his purposes. And it starts to see people, broken people, and it starts to see, and Mel's quite right, is sometimes you only get to know a person by being with them, true or false? But when you're with that person and you're being with that person, when you get to observe how they tick, why they do what they do, their actions, their reactions, their mode, it's hard to discern motives until they're outworked, true? But when you're seeing the outwork motives by them doing what they do and they're communicating to you why they do what they do, and it's when all of that's unpacked for you, you see their heart. Is that true or false? And as you see their heart, you're going, oh wow, I'm seeing the inner workings of this person. They're sharing, they're not just sitting down and having coffee and telling me about themselves. I'm seeing that person unpack the inner soul, the inner life out as it's outworked, and I'm there with them. And what Mel was saying, if you want to know Jesus, walk with him. What do you think it means to walk with him? When he called people on those dusty roads in Galilee, they walked with him as he walked into his Father's purpose. And they saw him unpacking his life and his heart and his walk with God as he took his Father into that world. And that's discipleship, but it's also following Jesus. It's not information and going to church. It's a real life, walking with Jesus beside you as you go into your day, meeting people that he's foreordained you to meet. Not every single one of them, but there'll be many times a day the Lord is wanting to be with the person, and his only way to be with that person and express himself in his heart to that person is through you. And as you join with him, as you become attentive and join with him, you start to feel his heart. We often joke, if you ever want to feel the heart of God, get about a metre away from a broken person and start talking to them, and you'll start to, within yourself, his heart will start manifesting within your own soul. And then you'll naturally want to engage with him. The mercy that he has for that person starts to operate inside your own heart, and you feel the mercy. And you're moved to cooperate with him. So anyway, we'll take a break there, and then we'll continue. Jeremy is our faithful timekeeper. 7, Jeremy. Grab it.